Welcome to this video presentation of the United Nations pre-deployment visit. After this presentation, you should be able to summarize the purpose of the pre-deployment visit, explain the importance of the pre-deployment visit. The aim of the pre-deployment visit is to ensure that the troop or police contributors meet the operational requirements of the mission. The personnel are trained according to the United Nations pre-deployment training standard, and that specialists meet the education requirement, drivers and doctors, etc. In addition to the deployment planning, the primary purpose of the pre-deployment visit is to ensure that the troop or police contributors unit have the necessary training and equipment accordingly to what has been agreed in the Memorandum of Understanding. The United Nations pre-deployment team will identify possible shortfalls of the equipment or training needed for personnel, suggests amendments, if any, to draft Memorandum of Understanding and confirm the deployment timing and preparations. The pre-deployment visit takes normally 5 to 7 days, all depending how the troop police contributors has planned the visit, the distances where all the equipment are stored, etc. The United Nations plan the recce visit, and the troop police contributors plan the pre-deployment visit. In both visits, the planning part has to have a good dialogue with the visiting part. The United Nations pre-deployment team will consist of experts from both United Nations headquarters and from the field mission. Often you will meet United Nations personnel that you already have met during the Memorandum of Understanding negotiation in New York. The United Nations conducts normally only one pre-deployment visit to a military unit prior to the initial deployment. For police units, the United Nations conducts a pre-deployment visit prior to each rotation. From the troop police contributor side, there are no limit who needs to be a part, or who has to be a part, or who wants to be a part of the national team. As long as the national team have the resources and authority to demonstrate or show or explain all the questions or requests from the United Nations pre-deployment team. Even if the United Nations pre-deployment team are responsible for their own expenses, it is expected that the national pre-deployment team organize and cover all transportations inside their own country. Unlike the recce visit, there will often be a mover from the troop police contributors present. The United Nations movement control sections, both in New York and in the mission, will also be present, as one of the main purposes of the pre-deployment visit is to determine whether the preconditions for a successful deployment are present. The United Nations pre-deployment team's general tasks are listed on the slide. The United Nations pre-deployment team are there to support and guide the troop police contributor, and not only to inspect and report. In connection with the pre-deployment visit, the United Nations Movement Control Section's task is to review the troop police contributors' deployment plan and highlight, if necessary, changes and outstanding demands that require action from the troop or police contributor. Review the load lists in order to clarify uncertainties and identify dangerous goods which the troop police contributors has not identified. Inspect major equipment to check that stated targets on the load lists are in accordance with the realities. Inspect packing of containers, and brief the troop police contributors about the final deployment plan. The troop police contributors' general tasks are listed on the slide. It is important to have conducted proper preparations, so all adequate paperwork, lists, photos, and equipment can be present to the United Nations pre-deployment team. This slide is a lesson learned slide regarding movement control issues. Load lists are often not complete, and the stated dimensions are not in accordance with reality. Some nations has no qualified trained personnel to identify and handle dangerous goods. Therefore, it's often discovered dangerous goods on the load lists that are not identified by the troop or the police contributor, and what is identified does not have the sufficient documentations. In this regard, United Nations can support the troop or police contributors with trained personnel with dangerous goods experience. One of the challenges regarding calculating transport requirement based on packing in 20-foot containers is to assess the volume. Experience shows that volume often is underestimated by the troop or police contributors and therefore increases the needed transport capacity. Another challenge is that the troop or the police contributors doesn't pack the 20-foot containers in a proper manner. Packing and marking are often insufficient, causing damage to the equipment during transportation. Balancing the equipment weight inside the containers are often wrong and changes the center of gravity on the container. This creates large problems during both on- and offloading of the containers. If all these errors are not recognized in time, it will lead to major problems in connection with the actual deployment in the form of insufficient transport capacity, material damage, and, in worst case, accident with serious personnel injury. We have in this presentation introduced you to the United Nations pre-deployment visit. Key takeaway: pre-deployment visit is United Nations official visit to the member states prior to the deployment. The intent of the pre-deployment visit is to exchange information and confirmations of the troop police contributors' readiness prior to the deployment to a United Nations mission. Thank you for following this presentation.